Left unmitigated, psychosocial hazards can produce psychosocial risk that will ultimately produce harm in the workplace. The management of these and other risks is the primary focus of professional risk managers. We'll talk with a risk manager who also has a background in health and safety on this episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast.
From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. As workplace mental health has become a global priority, there's a greater focus on addressing psychosocial hazards. Each episode, we look at psychological safety from an occupational health and safety perspective. Let's talk Psych Health and Safety.
Welcome to this week's Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. I'm your host, Dr. I. David Daniels, and I want to thank you for tuning in. Each week, we seek to increase awareness of the importance of psychological health and safety by learning from the lived experiences, research, and expertise of our guests, as well as advocating strategies to reduce harm and minimize vulnerability to psychosocial hazards in the American workplace. So there are two really important sides of every serious conversation about safety and safety culture. There's the kind of the leading indicator side of the conversation. That's, folks like me who are really all about prevention and all about safety and all about leading indicators. And there's another side of the conversation. There is the more risk management focused, focusing on the lagging indicators, the data, the information, managing, insurance and those types of things. And they're both very, very important. Because you can have folks from either side of the conversation, kind of on the polar opposites, who will say that, look, stuff happens. We got to be able to deal with it. That's really what costs money. As a matter of fact, in the business world, you will find many more organizations with risk managers that don't necessarily have primarily safety-focused people. You have others that'll have a great safety professional who just believes everything can be prevented and just can't understand why they just can't, eliminate all those issues. The reality is that the world is not perfect and neither is any of us. And we really need both. We really need to have a conversation about the things that we can prevent, but also strategies to be able to address those situations that we just can't. And fortunately, today's conversation with somebody who gets both of them, who has both a safety background and has certainly a current role that is more focused on risk management. So before I get too far into this, let's just get to it. And we're going to get to it in the way that I often bring folks on the podcast with this particular guest. My question to you is, who is Chris Linton?
Well, hey, thank you, Dr. Daniels. I appreciate you having me on. Today, I feel very honored. Didn't realize that this was season 2 of your podcast endeavor. So I appreciate the time with you today and your audience. So that's a interesting question, right? Who is Chris Linton? I think I'm still trying to find that out myself, right? I think as we all do, right? You go through these different waves of who you think you are or who you think you ought to be, right? But I guess if you kind of look at it from or I would call it the more foundational aspect of where somebody would ask you, all right, so who are you, right? So first of all, I'm a human being, right? I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a safety and risk professional. I'm sort of a jack of all trades. From the standpoint of it depends on what is being asked and what I'm trying to deliver, right? So I guess from a professional standpoint, I've got 20-something years of environmental health and safety and risk management and business continuity, organization resilience experience spanning multiple industries, again, over multiple decades. So that's sort of the professional side of it, got myriad of safety and risk designations or certifications, postgraduate degrees, so yada yada yada. We can kind of go over all of that. But all of that, I would probably just sum it up to say is that, Chris Linton is part of more or less like to try to have a sort of a servant leader perspective, try to help organize, right? I think if I looked at my personality traits, and I've done these over a lot of years with different organizations, I guess they would consider me a sort of like a supervisor, always trying to protect, right? Maybe to some degree over towards one end of the spectrum, or maybe over protect, right? But that's just part of my nature, and that's probably why I've sort of found myself landing in this role, because I'm trying to always try to help others, overcome whatever it is that the obstacles that they're facing, whether it's from a personal standpoint or a professional standpoint or a hybrid mix of both, right? As we're kind of talking a little bit about psychological safety and psychosocial safety, right? They're all kind of interconnected, right? It's what's happening to people in their personal lives, in their own headspace, how that's getting translated in their work environment, in their professional space. So it's all really all interconnected. So it's one big mush, and it's very interesting that we as humans, right, we try to think that we can compartmentalize, but we really can't, at least from a long-term standpoint. Some people are really good at just kind of, hey, here's a box, this is what I need to deal with now. I'll leave everything else, the hard stuff, right, the squishy stuff, to kind of deal with later, and may not have the same approach, prescriptive approach, to say, hey, here's an input to give me an output with a work task, versus here's a relationship issue, here's an input, I can't figure out what the input is, much as how to figure out what the output is going to be, right? So I'm kind of using that sort of a analogy there. So it's a really interesting time, right, in the human dynamics aspect there. At least that's how I would characterize it.
Sure,
if it kind of makes sense.
Sure. Yeah. So you mentioned a couple of areas that I'd like to delve into, and the first is, and again, and I asked this question. The first two are pretty standard. Any guest that I get, really looking for the perspective of the person. So what does psychological health and safety, when you hear that, what does that mean to you?
It can be looked at in different dimensions, right? And the way I say it is like, psychological safety could be, hey, if you're in a relationship, you're a spousal relationship, right? There's psychological safety that's part of that, right? There's in a work environment, right? There's in your organization, church, right? Community-based activities, right? There's a whole aspect of that there. So it just depends on the context and dynamics. But I think at the end of the day, if you kind of distill it, in my humble opinion, is how are you position yourself and others around you to feel that they're in a safe space, right? Safe space to come forward with some of the hard things, safe space to be able to have a trusting relationship that they can share, some of the more the deepest and darkest stuff that's just tormenting them, right, without feeling judged or potentially marginalized, because hey, you're not supposed to be thinking like that, right? So it really has a multitude of dimensions. If from my perspective, because I'm going to tell you this much, I struggle with some of those things even on my own personal side, right? It's trying to make sure that you're not creating a perception that you're not fostering a trusting environment where folks feel that they can come to you and talk through certain things without being, like I said, judged or feel like they're going to be kowtowed, or right, use a whole soliloquy here, right, from that standpoint. So it's it is challenging,
Yes.
right? Because, we're all human beings, right? And we've got all our own fallacies. We've got our deficits, right? Things that we're all trying to work on within us. And then you're also trying to help others work on it for themselves. It's heavy.
Yeah.
It's heavy stuff.
It is.
It is heavy stuff.
It is.
It is really, really heavy stuff. And I don't know there's been probably a whole series of things that have really maybe amplified kind of where we're at right now, right? Some things are seen forces, some are unseen forces, right? That are acting upon us, right? That have, and maybe for the better or for the worse, not quite sure. I'm sort of like on the fence now on even that regard, right? But it's just it's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of stuff.
I agree. It's a fairly simple concept to explain something that's extremely complex. It is. And I think sometimes that's why, particularly as the safety profession is having sometimes kind of struggling with, adjusting to having this conversation on top of all the physical things we've talked about for years.
Yes.
Because it does seem it's just so complex. It affects everybody slightly different. But, certainly my view is that so do the physical things. They're not near as clean and, utilitarian as we try to make them.
Right.
Because what is safe for one person may not necessarily be safe for everyone else, in that very same environment. So, so along those lines, you have a long background in safety, and it sounds like that's kind of where it started. I know a lot of folks get into safety for some particular reason. Something happens that, really says, I start to really focus on that whole, safety related conversation.
Right.
What got you started? How did you just come out of the crib and know, hey, I want to be a safety person today? Or
no,
how did that start for you?
It's ironic. So here's a little bit of backstory there, right? So coming from the Caribbean, an island boy, immigrant, right? Which, we all are, right? At some point, right? And my dream was to be a pilot. So talk about, a risky kind of a profession, right? I mean, which is ironic because statistics tell you that it's probably one of the safest form of transportation.
It
right?
is, in fact.
Right? Which is sort of very counterintuitive for folks that wouldn't necessarily wrap their minds around it, saying, man, you're taking me up 30,000 feet, right? In an iron bird that is not made to stay up there, right? God created us to be on God Green's earth with our feet on the floor, right? Not right. So I wanted to do that for many years, and I actually started along that journey. Matter of fact, went to junior college in Florida for about 2 years, trying to get myself going, and then circumstances happened, and wasn't able to continue that. I sort of relocated from where I was before, and sort of changed my trajectory. And long story short, I went back to school. Because I started school and I had like a 5-6 year gap where I just was like, hey, I need to work. I need to get this paper, right? And at one point, my then girlfriend, who's my wife now, said, what do you want to do? You're gonna do this for the. And I'm like, you know what? I think you're right. And I decided to at least go back and get my education. And with that, I really had a proclivity for the natural sciences, even way back as a youngster in high school, the biology, chemistry, physics, right? So I always had that proclivity for it. I said, let me go pick a major that's kind of along those lines. And I'm like, environmental sciences. All right. I get the environmental. I like the sciences. So started on that journey as my undergrad, and I had a mentor and a professor who was the chair of our environmental sciences department. He's like, hey, Mr. Linton, you ever thought about EHS? I'm like, I know the E. I don't know what the heck the H and S is.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, I've got an internship that I just came across that you may have an interest in. And that actually started my initial journey supporting EHS in let's put it this way, the adult beverage industry.
Sure.
Right? So that's kind of how I, quote unquote, fell into it.
Okay.
Kind of backed myself into it. And then from there, it's just evolved and progressed to sort of where I am right now, where, try to get myself to be as agnostic as possible without a label, right? Saying, hey, you know what, I'm a practitioner that's trying to help solve problems,
Sure.
whatever that space is in, whether it's operations problem, because there's an undercurrent with obviously safety and productivity and all that good stuff, right? To resilience, to environmental, right? So I try to keep myself a little bit out of that box where you're a health and safety guy or an EHS guy, or now they don't even know what to really kind of characterize me as, because I try to jump into different spaces where they go, man, that's really not really your wheelhouse. I'm like, well, I think I can help from that standpoint because I've got an operational experience working with manufacturing partners. So being able to speak their language when they come up and I go, you talk about capacity, or how does capacity relate to resilience or environmental health and safety, right? Staffing, right? Labor staffing. So I think I've acquired enough of the exposure to be able to kind of helicopter into a conversation and had some sort of value to that piece of the conversation, which is ultimately trying to solve a problem.
Sure.
So
sure.
Sure. Yeah. So that's sort of the bookend so far in the journey.
So there are again, two things you mentioned I want to drill into a little bit more. One I was going to do anyway, and another that you just brought up about the importance of being able to have those business conversations. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about the whole risk management related thing, because again, some people do see them as very distinct, very different.
Sure.
Sometimes, almost competing types of activities. I've found a couple of situations I was in where the risk management and safety folks had sometimes difficulty integrating because they saw themselves as two different things as opposed to just different sides of the same coin.
Sure.
So chat a little bit about some of your, more risk focused expertise, experience, background.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because it doesn't follow the traditional fit. As you said, risk management, they're looking at rates, right, and dollars. If you kind of think about it, right, and risk management, we know historically falls within two functions in an organization, primarily finance.
Yes,
that's usually what it jumps into. You may get some organizations that have it related to HR, maybe, but traditionally it's been in finance. For the most part, or the controller, right?
Sure.
Right? Somewhere where they're looking at, their, experience modification rates or what have you, and saying, hey, guess what? We're self-insured, but we're allocating too much working capital to this bucket, whether it's workers' comp or it's general liability or what have you, right? And then as you said, you get the EHS folks that are saying, hey, no, we need to do this, we need to do that, so we need to tie up some more of this money for these kind of programs, right? And I've never really been in both of those. I kind of come into a little bit of that middle ground from a resilience standpoint and go, all right, so what's going to increase the resilience of the organization, whether it's on the insurance side or the health and safety side, right? Or property, right? Because risk management has a property risk component to it as well, right? So I try to kind of come in and try and figure out how best, because I've never really been, other than the EHS side, which I've heavily been on for a majority of my career. The risk management side has just been working with, insurance folks, or people that manage the self-insurance pool of money, and how they would deploy it, right? So my interaction has been just trying to bridge the two together to say, hey, what from an organization standpoint, where are we trying to go to make sure that we've got alignment on what that ultimate goal is going to be.
Hi listeners, Jason here. We hope you're enjoying this latest podcast episode. Now, if you're like Joelle, Alicia and myself and enjoy learning from the best, then the Flourish DX Academy is for you. The Academy includes free e-learning courses on the ISO 45003 standard for psychological health and safety at work, and associated topics such as how to conduct a psychosocial risk assessment and how to create the business case for psych health and safety. All courses feature high-quality videos, downloadable resources, multi-choice questions, and a downloadable training certificate on completion. Take your learning to the next level with all Flourish DX Academy courses included within the Flourish DX mobile app. Select podcast episodes from the Psych Health and Safety podcast and sister podcasts from Canada and the USA are also included. Get started with Flourish DX for free at www.flourishdx.com/get-started. That's www.flourishdx.com/get-started. Now back to this episode.
So the conversation around risk management is, it's actually pretty common when safety folks get in the room, and they can kind of chop it up about some aspects of that. But it becomes a little bit more challenging when we start talking about business continuity, business integration, that type of thing, because unfortunately for some, there are those, particularly again in the business, on the for-profit side, that see the operations and safety are at odds. That's those safety people, they're just slowing me down. I got production I got to get done, blah, blah, blah. So again, for full disclosure, I'm a difficult person to have that with because I am more one-sided. I'm honest about it. I came into the safety profession from emergency services, and I'm the guy who these businesses called when their production got someone's limb cut off or got their building caught on fire. So I always saw it from that side, and I can't help it. I tend to look at safety from that rather dire perspective, but at least I'm honest about it. I've learned the importance of risk management, but I'm one of those people who says, look, I don't really care how much it costs you. Nothing's worth killing people, and you're going to pay more later. So we really need folks with your kind of business savvy, which is the reason I'm probably not in some big business right now anyway, but that have the business acumen. So talk a little bit about the importance of being able to have these safety and risk management conversations in the context of a business environment.
Yeah, no, and you're spot on. There's competing dynamics. There is tension, right? Some people might say healthy tension or unhealthy tensions, right? Because it's competing priorities, just like competing resources, right? You only have so much of a pot to pull from to resolve whatever burning issues are there, right? So within that context, right, the way I look at it is, okay, where's the ultimate value proposition that we're trying to go after, right? Yes, on the one hand, we said, yes, human capital it's a priority, it's the most important thing, right? With a little bit of an asterisk beside it, right? Let's just call it for what it is, right? Yeah. So even with the business, you alluded to the business acumen and stuff. At the end of my day, I'm still like you. I'm born and bred like that. Now, I've got to be able to use some of those acquired skills to not let them think that's the way I still have it. Right. But you're trying to give them the sort of a little bit of the business out, whether it's in, whatever, the financial metrics, right? Where it kind of makes sense. So there's a little bit of that, quote unquote, not to be redundant here, psychological piece that you're trying to also integrate within those conversations with those folks. So that's kind of how I see it. I mean, it's a constant struggle and a battle, right? And some people will tell you, right, depending on what kind of leadership and culture that's in the organization, they'll say, hey, those are healthy ones that we should have. It only helps the organization grow, because that's how you get different perspectives. But at the end of the day, we know it. The business is going to make a decision based on how they feel best to move it forward, right? So yes, we know that one life, one limb, one anything is too many. But to your point, have you learned, we have to be realistic that you got to choose your battles. And I hate to put it that way.
You do.
Right?
You do.
Right?
Well,
you're looking at the war in the end of it, right?
That's
and
right.
It's going to be wins and losses as we're going along.
That's right.
That's
right.
just how life is, right?
It is.
It's no different. And I think I was having this conversation. I'm not making an equivalency here, right? But I was having this conversation with, I think, my wife a few weeks ago, and we're talking about the struggles of different groups, and I made the case about, hey, listen, it took United States how many years to get a stupid Civil Rights Act passed, right? Which has just been the most recent decades ago, right? But guess what? They kept coming back to it when he got knocked down. They kept coming back because that was the war, right? Not just this initial battle. You're looking at it more long-term and long lenses. How are we moving the battle, right? Long view, or how you want to do it. Long-term look, long view look. Yes, you got to take some of the casualties in the interim, right? But I kind of almost sum it up to be the same thing with how the battles are, whether it's resiliency, whether it's EHS, whatever it is that we're on our own little island, or we think we're on our own little island trying to fight, and then kind of pulling into this psychological safety now where people are saying, hey, listen, certain things that have actually happened the last 3 years, COVID and other, those things have actually spurred folks to reevaluate what is important to them.
Yes.
It's no longer the thing of, hey, guess what? I'm humping my butt and I'm getting a paycheck, right? And hey, you should be kind of satisfied with that, right? Right? Now it's like, hey, I'm more than that. It's kind of getting a little bit more amplified. I'm more than that. I can offer your organization more than that if you just create the right space and environment for me. So if you're telling me like certain financial institutions, I won't name any, where after COVID and stuff, they went, you need to go back into the office because that's what stirs collaboration. That's what gives us innovation. That's all that is really a dollar sign.
Yes.
If you ask me, that's the output.
Yes.
Let's call it for what it is, right? You try and pretty it up to say, well, this spurs collaboration and innovation. I don't disagree.
Right.
Don't disagree. But there's multiple ways to skin the cat.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
There's multiple ways to skin the cat, and people are built differently. And what was interesting is that I think a lot of organizations thought people were monolithic in their thinking, that they're all built the same way. Hey, I got an office I go to 5 days a week, 4 days a week. I sit here, I collaborate with my peers and cross collaborate because that was the way it was, the approach. Now external forces come in and just kind of shake up that whole paradigm. And then the status quo is saying, no, that's kind of that's how it's worked. Well, kind of how it worked because that was what you knew.
Right. Yeah.
Now, if you're talking about innovation and your company that's exposed to innovation, so why is it you're thinking that you want to innovate in a different way and a different approach, but for that type of approach, you're not really willing to want to innovate? It's very contradictory.
I
very contradictory.
I find it extremely interesting to hear organizations who say, we're really focused on creativity and innovation, and we want to get the best out of people. But then they seem to forget that the people themselves are constantly changing.
And innovating.
Constantly. As a human being, I am not the same person today that I was 10 years ago or 20, or I'm just not. And it's not good or bad, right or wrong. It's just different. That's all.
Right.
We all, anything or any person that does not evolve we'll
Right.
become extinct.
Exactly.
That's the only option. Evolution is absolutely mandatory.
Right.
You cannot do the same thing year after year after year. And again, if that's going on with me, it's going on with the people around us. And these social systems that we've created, called work, called school, called whatever it is,
Very
that
monolithic.
are monolithic, that say it's got to be done this way. Who says that? Somebody said that. Maybe I said that 10 years ago, but I'm not the same person that I was then. And I just think that's really so important. And that's where these conversations about psychological and health and safety come in, because I can make the argument that anytime you place heat, fuel, and oxygen in proximity to one another, fire is the outcome, period.
Sure.
It just doesn't matter.
Right.
The sources may be different, but you put that, and if you had the chemical reaction, you're going to get a fire.
Of course.
But if you get 4 different people together, and if you get 4 different people at different stages and phases in their lives, you're going to get something different. So from what makes me feel safe today is not the same thing that made me feel safe years ago. And it's not the same thing that will make me feel safe in the future. So it requires this constant, this constant analysis of, so what's the end game? Is the end game, making a profit through, the involvement of human beings? Well, it seems to me that the human beings are the important piece.
Right.
The profits are kind of the outcome that I will not get unless I can get the human beings collaborating in a way that works for them, not in a way that works for those 4 people or 8 people or 100 people, whatever it is. And then ultimately we end up with the outcome that we all say we're looking for.
Right. Right. And I think a major component of it is like anything else, right? And this is just human nature. Just like organizations are their own entity, they're their own kind of human, their own being, rather, not human, their own being. They're a collection of us, right? It's that fear factor, fear of the unknown. So when you fear something, you run to the corner that makes you happy and comfortable. Right? It's like a baby that it just gets upset. You give them a pacifier and right? So that is and we have to, as much as we may think of where thought processes are, we have to acknowledge that others in power or a higher degree of power or influence, the way I look, I use that relative because people's perception of the power that they have is just that, right? So let's just kind of leave that. It's a different sort of philosophical piece. But people that are in those influences of power, they are like us. They fear the unknown. And if they fear the unknown, they're going to revert to what has worked for them. Yes. Right? But we have to acknowledge that and say, and again, just like anything, you don't pass the value judgment on them because we'd be very hypocritical if we are.
That's right. That's right.
Let's call it for what it is, right? You need to be consistent and say, hey, they have that fear too, so I have to acknowledge that they have it. How can we collectively move them in where we think the direction is to be?
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, what's really most important in most human endeavors is where we are going, what we are trying to achieve, and when we're trying to do it, not necessarily how we do it. We end up in lots of conversations about how, and we miss how is determined by what and when. Let's figure that out. Let's agree on that piece, and then allow each of us to contribute in a way that's comfortable for me. If you and I decide that we're going to take a trip, the first thing we have to do is decide where we're going,
right,
when we're going to get there. Right. And then we could start getting into the details about the mode of travel. Because if you and I decide that, okay, so we're going to meet in some city in the U.S. in 3 months, that gives us plenty of opportunity to decide how we get there, to include, there are some places I could walk there in 3 months. I could. I could walk, I could fly, I could take a bike, I could take a skateboard. Sure. I could get on a boat. There's all, but I have to know where I'm going first. And I even from a safety and risk management perspective, I think sometimes we lose sight of what's the point. We're trying is keeping people safe and keeping our assets safe. Is that really the goal? Because if that is the goal, why do we have so many rules about this and that that we wrote 10 years ago or 15 years ago or 20 and we're still doing them? Why? Well, because they worked then.
Yeah,
but things have changed.
Yeah, but and then I think it's so much, not even so much, it is that things have changed, but the velocity of the change is what's really, to me, that's amplified the apple cart, so to speak.
Yes.
It's the velocity of it. It's like years gone by. And again, this is a hallmark to me of how evolved we've come in not only just our human nature, but the tools that we currently have at our disposals, right? Which are born out of innovation,
right?
Social media, innovation, right? So it's ironic that the tools that we've actually developed, because we talk about, innovation and stuff, guess what? That is what is actually helping to create this sort of like dynamic and, albeit, depending on what your lens too, transformative era that we're in now, which is very contradictory. It's like almost as if we're saying, well, no, we like innovation for certain things, but we don't like innovation for some other things.
Yeah.
Because that might upset the apple cart and maybe short-sightedly maximize shareholder returns or maximize my own self-interest for, hey, is my restricted shares are going to be looking like this now because of, right? There's a whole bunch of different things, right? Because people are motivated for different things. We know that. That's part of the human dynamic, which is where you'd have to say, hey, let me get into the head of a CEO that at one point was saying, oh yeah, the future of work and hybrid. And then a year later, no, we can't do that. So what was the intent? What was the motivation, right? Was it just the herd mentality? We're in the throes of COVID. Let's just go along with everybody else because our peers are saying these, but we really didn't, that wasn't our intent, right? Our culture isn't built like this versus, and that's why I respect some of these other organizations, even though I may not like it. Some of these organizations were right from the jump saying, we don't believe in a hybrid environment or whatever. And they didn't flip-flop. They said it straight up. So it's almost like you'd rather somebody be that honest than a sheep in wolf clothing type of thing, right?
That's right.
So
that's right.
Wolf in sheep clothing, I should say.
Sure.
Right? So you may not like it, but at least you know that they're being straight and candid. You know where they're coming from.
That's right. And to your point, it is. So I found in my research that when workers are exposed to psychosocial hazards, their coping mechanisms are going to be different, but they're going to be more effective when they are aware of what's coming. Yeah, it's when it surprises us. So we've got this thing at the top of our the top of our spine, base of our brain, called the amygdala. It's there for a reason. And when we surprise people with things, the amygdala fires up, fight, flight, freeze. I mean, it's going to happen almost instantaneously. But when we get the opportunity to process and kind of move that decision-making forward into our prefrontal cortex, we can have a more reasoned, okay, this is what's getting ready to happen. This is what I'm being asked to do. This is the input. And I have time to kind of think about it. And again, that time to think about it is, it's different depending on the risk that the person is going to be exposed to. Sure. But the more information we give people up front, and again, back to your point, is I believe that too many organizations are just they're not honest about what really is going on. They say things that sound good, but they don't believe it. And it shows up in your actions later anyway. So why not just say, this is what we believe. This is what we think is important here. And then let the other human beings decide whether or not they want to sign on to that or not. Because if you tell me, I can decide, if you don't provide a hybrid work environment and I don't want to do that, I'll go someplace else. If you don't, if you want everyone to go remote, for some people, remote work is really challenging.
Sure.
because they want to be, they want to be physically present with people.
Right.
But none of it's right or wrong. People should have those options, but people have to be clear. And to me, this is really one of the important tools and strategies to achieving psychological safety is honesty. Simply, this is what this environment is. These are the things that go on in this environment. I knew when I signed up with the Seattle Fire Department that I was going to be going to buildings that were going to be on fire. It wasn't a surprise. Like, whoa.
Right.
Now, there are some other areas where they really didn't tell me as much as I would have known. This is, looking back, 40 years ago, that I would have wanted to know more about certain things, but they didn't totally surprise me on that part. And so, again, I think we have better tools, better information, better ways to assess, these hazards now.
Yeah.
And we can just tell people.
Yep. Yeah. Well, it's, as you said, it's still down between, right, honesty and that trust factor, right? So you either don't trust your human capital enough to be able to give them that runway for them to make that informed decision and determine whether or not, versus, hey, I'm going to handcuff you, or think I'm going to handcuff you by relegating it to that, right? And that's kind of where, like him or not like him, or hate him or despise him. You look at Elon Musk. He came in and said, hey, guess what? Hybrid and work from home is garbage. Doesn't work for my environment. Doesn't work for our culture, Tesla or Twitter or wherever, right? He was being upfront about it, right?
Right.
And then, again, like it or not like it, right? Then you can decide what where you want to go from that standpoint. It's difficult, right? Because there's a lot of things that are tied to people's decision making, your tenure at an organization, where you are, right? What your obligations are. And that's where people will obviously use all those inputs to help them decide. They may not like it that you're forcing them to have to do all those calculations in their head. We do it all the time, right? Just in general, right? But it's just on a more, a more grander scale, and maybe more life-changing and life-altering, because that's what it comes down to.
Sure. Absolutely.
That's really what it comes down to, right? Whether somebody opts to, hey, this is not an organization that lines up with my value anymore, I'm going to move on from them. And that's for any dimension, right?
That's right.
Whether the work's isn't stimulating anymore, or if it's something to do with, hey, it's a high hazard environment and I don't feel that you're keeping me physically safe, or whether it's a psychosocial environment where I don't think you're keeping me psychologically safe, right? People make these decisions all the time. So even that, having said that, it really, I don't know why we would be treating this part of it any kind of really differently. Right. We really shouldn't be any stark difference. As I said, it's just been more amplified because of external factors, i.e. COVID, right? Or maybe some people might say now, well, it's been in the undercurrents for a lot of time, but just COVID just was the opportunity for people to just put it out there. That could be it too as well. I don't know, right? But the fact of the matter is, it's out there. So, how do we want to deal? How do we want to deal?
Absolutely.
Yeah. How do we want to deal?
Right.
And some organizations are going to deal better, and some won't, right? But some people might look at that and say, hey, that's kind of Darwinism. It's the evolution of organizations. Some will get it and continue to thrive and prosper, and some won't, and die out and fade like a star that comes to its end of life, right?
Yeah.
And then in between, and then you'll have in between too, right?
That's right.
So it's just fascinating. It really is fascinating. And we as professionals are caught up in between that, right? You get like an HR person come and say, all right, so what are we doing about psychosocial safety? And you kind of look at them and go, well, that's maybe a fancy term of things that we've been dealing with for a long time, right? You think about, as you said, you get rules and procedures that we put in place to keep people, right? You're trying to really almost automate their behavior based on certain prescribed rules and stuff, right? Well, we know, yes, we're in a civil society. There has to be rules and guardrails, right?
Yes.
probably some more than others, right? Just depending, right? So now we're trying to figure out, again, the trust factor. How do we loosen the reins so people can make more informed decision given the condition and context of what they're facing at that given moment?
Sure.
We'll know it. There's not a high degree of trust within organizations to allow people to do that. Very few organizations have that high degree of trust between employees and employer or frontline supervisor, and it's just because we're a rules-based society.
Yes.
We're a rules-based society, and that's where people say that's how we maintain quote-unquote order in the public sphere, whether it's order through the Constitution, rules, and that, and all the way down to order when your kid goes to school.
Right.
Hey, this is where you get lunch. This is the classroom you go to.
Right.
This is when you do this. This is when you do that. This is right.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, it's interesting. It really is interesting.
It's all part of the reality that we get to be a part of. But again, at the same token, there's always opportunities to continue to evaluate what we're doing and make sure that what we're doing is getting us wherever it is that we want to go. So as we start to conclude, as we conclude the conversation, I want to give an opportunity to just leave some, words of wisdom, something you think we didn't really cover really from this, again, this whole, this career arc of yours between safety and risk management and the business acumen in the middle. So any tip you want to leave folks with that are listening, the floor is yours.
Yeah, you know what? You remember we had this session a few months back, right? We had the panel. Remember we had the panel discussion and folks that were thinking, kids were thinking of coming into the space. And I think you asked me asked the panel one parting words of wisdom, I thought, and I said, you know what? Just be curious. Just be a curious individual to stick your nose politely and professionally in other areas where people may not think that is your wheelhouse. I will tell you, let me show you this book right here, Dr. Daniels. See this book? It says Supply Chain Management.
Okay.
Now you ask me, well, Chris, why are you sharing this book? Because I am curious, because there's something in here that will help my organization be as resilient as possible given certain dynamics, right?
Okay.
It's all about and this is for a manufacturing type of organization.
Sure.
But I'm curious enough to know what is within this discipline that I can take that will be value added to my organizations.
Wow.
So I'll just leave it at that. Be curious. Be curious and not just in your own wheelhouse, so to speak. Right?
Wow.
Right? Open up. You have your fundamentals, right? You know where your bread is buttered. I'm not saying no, but expand that mind, right? Because you never know when one of those nuggets will be able to help you get yourself into a conversation where you can potentially change or influence the arc of a decision that my 2, 3, 4 degrees of separation help to support one of your fellow employees that you're trying to progress something towards, whatever level you are within your organization, whether you're a technician, whether you're a mid-level EHS person, whether you're a senior level EHS executive, what have you, a business owner, right? That's just the way my brain kind of work at this stage in my career, right? So I'm always curious about different areas, different things, and just looking at how it's all potentially interconnected. It may not look that obvious now, but you're curious enough, you'll come across something that will potentially be that differentiator. That's really my parting word. Whether it makes sense to people out there or not, don't know, right? But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Chris, thank you. Thank you very much for sharing some time with me. I think you've given us some things to consider, and I really like that last one. Just be curious. Be curious. I heard once that the enemy of learning is knowing. Mm-hmm. So just be curious. Be curious. Yeah, so if you're watching or listening to this podcast for the first time, welcome. I hope something that you've heard will help you and will convince you to come back and tune in sometime in the very near future. Previous episodes of the podcast can be found on psychhealthandsafetyusa.com. Please become a part of the Psych Health and Safety USA movement by connecting to us on LinkedIn. And we will see you next time on the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. Thanks very much.
Tune in each Friday for new episodes of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. If you have a story or know of one that needs to be told, reach out to us on LinkedIn or send an email to david@id2-solutions.com or go to the Flourish DX website at flourishdx.com. We'll see you next time.